Woman calls for help after spotting strange animal in her yard, but nobody expected to find this. This woman was used to seeing animals in her garden because she lived near the forest. But one day, she saw an animal she had never seen before. The mysterious animal made her nervous and anxious, so she decided to call for help. With help, she started a search, but it wouldn't go as expected. But before we start our story, smash the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Charlotte loved her home. It was a little remote and near the woods, so she would see all kinds of animals in her garden. But this time, it was different. Charlotte was looking out over her garden when her eyes suddenly halted on a shadowy figure on the border. It was an animal. A frown appeared on her face as she squinted her eyes. But right at that moment, the animal stepped out from the shadow, and Charlotte let out a surprising yelp. Charlotte fumbled a little as she grabbed her phone and took a picture of the animal. It made her uncomfortable, and she wanted to know if it was dangerous and if there was an old acquaintance from high school who could probably help her. She looked through her phone for his number and dialed him. The acquaintance, Joe, was a hunter and agreed to come over. Once he arrived, Charlotte showed him the picture and explained what she saw. "Looks like a canine animal. Definitely some sort of predator," Joe said, fueling Charlotte's fear. "Why is it here? Where did it come from?" she asked anxiously. "I understand how you feel, but there is no reason to worry," Joe said, trying to calm Charlotte down. However, Charlotte couldn't help but notice that Joe's hands were trembling as he opened the back door. Because Joe asked her to show him where the animal stood and gestured for her to come with him, Charlotte looked around anxiously as she hesitantly guided the hunter to where she had seen the animal. Once there, her fears became true as they found remains. This animal was a predator and dangerous. With that information, the duo returned to the house. Charlotte was worried, and when she looked at Joe, she saw a mixture of nerves and excitement. The hunter explained he didn't have the right equipment and needed to go home to prepare better. "We can't follow it in the dark anyway," he said. Charlotte looked outside and noticed dusk was falling. She knew Joe was right, but had a hard time accepting it. From the moment the hunter left, her worries and fear increased. After a draining night, Charlotte got up and immediately went to her back door. The moment she set foot in her garden, her body froze. There were paw prints near the door. She did hear the animal last night. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as she called Joe. She didn't like this at all. Charlotte paced around the room while on the phone with Joe, but she suddenly halted. There, the animal was again on the border of her garden. "Hurry up," she exclaimed to Joe over the phone, explaining that she was looking at the mysterious animal right now. Moments later, the hunter arrived. Charlotte quickly welcomed him and grabbed the equipment Joe handed her. "Let's go," the hunter said. "Be careful and stay behind me," Joe urged Charlotte when he saw fresh tracks. The duo tracked the paw prints and other traces deeper and deeper into the woods. They made up a lot of ground quickly, and Joe said the tracks seemed to get fresher. "We're getting closer," he said with a mix of excitement and hurry in his voice. Meanwhile, Charlotte was contemplating her decision to come. With each step she took, she grew more anxious, but this was the only way she would find out what that mysterious animal was and why it was in her garden. The thought gave Charlotte courage and determination, but then the duo suddenly heard some leaves rustling behind them, and the fear inside Charlotte reignited. Charlotte and Joe abruptly stopped, and as they did, the rustling did as well. The duo looked around them and listened carefully. There was no indication the animal was in their direct vicinity, so they continued carefully. But it seemed they weren't careful enough, because a few minutes later, they suddenly heard a low growl. It was hard to place where it came from, as it seemed to come from multiple directions. Were there more of them? Were they in trouble? Was it worth it to try and find the animal? Charlotte turned pale and stepped closer to Joe, who grabbed her arm in support. The duo tracked the paw prints and other traces deeper and deeper into the woods. They made up a lot of ground quickly, and Joe said the tracks seemed to get fresher. "We're getting closer," he said with a mix of excitement and hurry in his voice. Meanwhile, Charlotte was contemplating her decision to come. With each step she took, she grew more anxious, but this was the only way she would find out what that mysterious animal was and why it was in her garden. The thought gave Charlotte courage and determination, but then the duo suddenly heard some leaves rustling behind them, and the fear inside Charlotte reignited. Charlotte and Joe abruptly stopped, and as they did, the rustling did as well. The duo looked around them and listened carefully. There was no indication the animal was in their direct vicinity, so they continued carefully. But it seemed they weren't careful enough because a few minutes later, they suddenly heard a low growl. It was hard to place where it came from as it seemed to come from multiple directions. Were there more of them? Were they in trouble? Was it worth it to try and find the animal? Charlotte turned pale and stepped closer to Joe, who grabbed her arm in support. "He must have been making the noises we heard," Joe whispered, sparking many questions in Charlotte's mind. Who was he? Where did he come from? And what does he want with the mysterious animal? Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the man and tried to find answers. The duo silently watched how the man took the animal with him. Charlotte didn't know what to do now, but Joe did. There was only one way to answer all their questions: following him. He wasn't aware of their presence, so they could find out what was going on if they were careful. The fact that an unknown man captured the animal made Charlotte even more curious. What could it be? Her curiosity won from her nerves, and she agreed with Joe's plan. She stayed close behind him and followed the man, who eventually led them to a clearing with a cabin. The duo remained in the shadows. Charlotte's heart was still pounding, and she was nervously looking around, making sure there weren't any more surprises. When she was satisfied, her focus returned to the man and his actions. He struggled with the animal as he tried to get it inside a cage, but then Charlotte's eyes grew big, because the cage the man was busy with wasn't the only one. Beside it stood two more cages, which were filled with the same kind of mysterious animal. Charlotte's mind was racing. There were more? What were they? What was this man doing? What is going on? She asked, with a quivering voice. Then Charlotte heard a sigh beside her and looked at Joe. It looked like he knew exactly what was happening. "It looks like he's breeding these animals," he said. Charlotte thought about it, and it seemed to be the most logical explanation. Why else would he have these animals in this remote location? The more Charlotte thought about it and watched the man's actions, the more she felt something seriously wrong was going on here. Her breathing quickened as she realized they may be in danger. This was way beyond their reach, and they needed help. "We should call the police," she whispered. But Joe shook his head to show his disapproval of her idea. "Those animals are dangerous. Who knows how they would react when police come barging in? We have to solve this problem delicately," he said. This seemed odd to Charlotte, but he was the expert, so she trusted his opinion. They stared at the huge man, who vanished inside the cabin. Charlotte was hesitant, as she didn't know what to do. The man was huge, and even though the animals were caged, they could still be dangerous. She voiced her concern. "So we have to be very careful," Joe said while clutching his rifle. Joe took the lead, and Charlotte hesitantly followed him. Her heart was pounding, but her urge to get answers was bigger than her nerves. Step by step, they got closer to the cabin, and it seemed like they would make it, but then the animals suddenly started growling, notifying the man. Without warning, the front door of the cabin flew open. A massive man stormed out holding an axe. "What are you doing here?" he yelled, swinging the weapon. Charlotte, terrified, burst into tears. "We're sorry, we will leave." Then, as quickly as his rage appeared, it faded. "I'm very sorry," he said more gently. He explained he thought they were someone else and wanted to scare them away. He lowered the axe and repeated his question calmly. Joe seized the moment. "What are you doing here?" Joe asked again, now aiming his rifle. "Let these animals go, or I will shoot." Charlotte stood in shock as the situation escalated. But the man, clearly intimidated, pleaded, "I can explain everything." Before he could continue, Charlotte, now beside the cages, asked, "What is this animal? It's been scaring me." "I need to know." The man looked at her, then answered, "They're coy wolves, a hybrid of coyotes and wolves. Not native to this area." The man explained he'd found them wandering near a heavily guarded structure deeper in the woods, high fences, security cameras. He suspected illegal breeding was happening there. He captured the animals to care for them and planned to release them safely, but feared being discovered by those responsible. Charlotte found his explanation convincing. Despite his harsh welcome, he hadn't harmed them, but Joe was still suspicious. "Why not report this to the police?" the man sighed. "I have no solid proof. Right now, I look like the criminal. I needed to be sure before involving the authorities." He sat on the bench outside his cabin. But suddenly, Joe struck him with the butt of his rifle and forced him to the ground. "What are you doing?" Charlotte cried. "We've been looking for these coy wolves for weeks," Joe said as he tied the man up. "And now I've finally found them." The man, shocked and furious, struggled beneath the restraints. "So, you're one of them? I was right?" Joe nodded, grinning. "Thanks for keeping them safe for us." Charlotte stood frozen. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Joe reached for his phone. "Time to bring the good news." With his focus elsewhere, Charlotte acted. Her body moved instinctively as she grabbed a heavy branch and struck Joe. She untied the man. "I never thought he'd do something like that," she said, shaken. The man, regaining composure, quickly restrained Joe. He realized things had spiraled out of control. The police had to be involved. When the authorities arrived, Charlotte and the man explained everything. He led them to the guarded building. Joe, seeking a lighter sentence, confessed and cooperated. The raid that followed was swift and effective. Inside, police uncovered enough evidence to dismantle the illegal breeding operation. Charlotte and the man were instrumental in the trial, providing testimony that ensured longer sentences for the offenders. Thanks to their bravery, the operation was permanently shut down. Under police supervision, Charlotte and the man helped relocate the coy wolves to an animal sanctuary, where they could recover before being released back into the wild. And when that was arranged, Charlotte could finally return home and relax.